After reading chapter 7, um, this chapter in specific was called A Post-Pandemic Playbook. Just from the title, I got, this is a playbook that we can use for when other pandemics happen in the future. The topics that were talked about in this chapter were accelerate vaccinations, ease restrictions on populations, emphasize education and harm reduction approaches over corrosive and punitive measures, encourage outdoor activities for respiratory pathogen control, reopen schools as soon as feasible, minimize lockdowns, de-emphasize ineffective measures as soon as possible, reassess testing practices and policies, expand access to outpatient therapies and prophylactics, and then prevent and prepare for future pandemics. So the sections that stood out to me the most was the accelerate vaccinations, emphasize education and harm reduction approaches over corrosive and punitive measures. And then another one that stood out to me a lot was reassess testing practices and policies. So starting with accelerate vaccinations, it talks about they have the steps for pandemic management. So I guess trying to read this. So the steps for the COVID-19 pandemic is to accelerate vaccination with global equity, erase restriction accordingly, emphasize education and harm reduction, encourage outdoor activities, reopen schools, minimize lockdowns, de-emphasize ineffective prevention measures, reassess need for testing as pandemic progresses, expand treatment and prophylaxis, and prepare for future pandemics. So there was a little sentence in this section for me that stood up. It says, for all future pandemics, vaccines will be our first line of defense. And we now have the tools to develop and deploy them quickly. Scientists should patiently explain the known safety of the mRNA vaccine technology, along with other vaccine platforms, and insist on a global vaccine equity to combat a pandemic. Although misinformation regarding COVID-19 vaccines hampered their uptake in the United States, acknowledging the different types of vaccines have different adverse effects and providing the option for personalized medicine by providing a variety of vaccine options will increase trust. Maximizing global vaccine production and equitable distribution must be the highest priority, and we should seek out innovative mechanisms of financing and licensing production that will make this possible. The wealthier countries should largely pay for this ongoing effort as a humanitarian imperative, as well as from an enlightened self-interest. So I think something from this it kind of gives us an insight on what we can prepare for and then how to prepare for it, essentially. And then another thing that I thought that was really interesting was the reassess testing practices and policies. I highlighted this specific one. It says, experience suggests that choice of diagnostic technologies should be determined by the intended use, whether to detect infection in individuals with suspected clinical symptoms or to identify potentially infectious individuals in order to inform isolation recommendations and conduct contact tracing. PCR-based assays were the preferred method for much too long in the pandemic despite being too sensitive. So hearing all of this information kind of, it kind of just like blew my mind a little bit. And then a quote that I had like the greatest impact was, in preparation for the next pandemics, international organizations should come up with detailed plans that are widely vetted and agreed upon. Lockdowns and quarantines, when and if only necessary, need to be designed with attention to equity and must include protection, prioritization, and compensation for those most vulnerable, including the elderly, the poor, and workers in frontline and informal jobs. That specific quote really stuck out to me, and I say that because a lot of people who are on the front line and had to work during the pandemic, they got treated so horribly. And I think it's good that we are finally realizing that.